The training room buzzed with post-drill chatter. A young woman sat quietly, unwrapping the bandage from her wrist, revealing a small faded line of black characters, barely visible beneath her skin. 3 recruits burst into laughter. "What's that, some cheap mall tattoo?" Kyle snorted. "Did you get that at a strip mall or something?" She said nothing, just pulled her sleeve down to cover the mark. That's when Commander Merrick walked in. "Today's training session will." His words died mid-sentence, as his eyes locked onto her wrist. The grizzled SEAL commander straightened his spine and snapped a perfect military salute. The entire room went dead silent. Haley Brooks had always been more comfortable with helicopter, engines, and people. At 29, she carried herself with the quiet precision of someone who'd learned that words were often unnecessary when action spoke louder. Her brown hair was always pulled back in regulation, tight bun, and her eyes held that peculiar stillness. That came from seeing too much. Too young, she started as a helicopter mechanic, before moving into forward reconnaissance. Most people didn't know that such units even existed, let alone what they did in the shadows. Between official military operations, the unit had been disbanded 2 years ago, its members scattered to the wind, with SEAL records and memories they couldn't share. Now she found herself at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility, part of an experimental integration program that brought together pilots, mechanics, and coastal operatives. It was supposed to create more versatile teams. In reality, it mostly created more opportunities for conflict. The training compound stretched across windswept California coast where salt air mixed with sweat, and the constant sound of instructors barking orders. Obstacle courses scarred the landscape, like battle wounds, and the crash of waves provided a relentless soundtrack to the daily grind of becoming something harder than what you were yesterday. Haley kept a small checklist notebook in her cargo pocket, jotting down equipment specs and maintenance schedules with the same methodical attention she gave everything else. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, which made her an easy target for the 3 recruits who decided she didn't belong. Kyle Martinez was the loudest of the trio, a former college football player who treated every conversation like a locker room. Rivers was quieter but meaner, with a smile that never reached his eyes. Dempsey just followed their lead, laughing at the right moments and nodding along to whatever cruelty they'd cooked up that day. "She's not even real SEAL material," Kyle had announced during their second week, loud enough for half the mess hall to hear. "They're just trying to fill quotas with whoever shows up." The small tattoo on Haley's left wrist became their favorite target. It was barely visible most of the time, just a line of small, black characters that looked faded and homemade. During he when sleeves rolled up, it caught their attention. Like blood in the water attracted sharks. Chief O'Hara, a grizzled medical officer with 30 years under his belt, had noticed it too, but unlike the recruits, his reaction was different. He'd pause sometimes when passing her in the corridor, his weathered eyes lingering on her wrist. Was something that looked almost like recognition. He never said anything, just nodded and moved on, but there was a weight to his silence. That felt different from everyone else's indifference. The breaking point came during lunch on a Tuesday. Haley sat alone at her usual table, working through a maintenance manual while eating. Kyle approached with his usual swagger, Rivers and Dempsey flanking him like backup dancers. "Hey, Ink Girl," Kyle said, sliding uninvited into the seat across from her. "What's that little scribble supposed to mean?" "Looks like something you get from a kitchen magician with a dirty needle." Haley didn't look up from her manual. She reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out a small faded unit patch, folding it carefully and placing it beside her tray. The gesture was quiet, almost reverent. "Just trying to stay a professional here," she said, her voice steady as steel. But Kyle wasn't done. He reached across the table and held up his own hand, mimicking her tattoo with crude pen marks. "Look, guys, I'm mysterious and edgy too." The laughter that followed echoed across the mess hall. But Haley just packed up her things and walked away in silence. The harassment escalated. During the following week's training exercises, the morning PT started with boat crew drills, where teams of 6 had to carry heavy rubber boats across sand dunes and into the surf. It was designed to build teamwork and trust. But Kyle's crew had different plans. "Remember, we're only as strong as our weakest link," Kyle announced as they lifted their boat, making sure everyone knew exactly who he considered the weak link to be. During the carry, as Haley strained under her portion of the weight, Kyle and Rivers would deliberately shift their grip, causing the boat to lurch unexpectedly in her direction. When she stumbled under the sudden extra load, they'd shake their heads and mock disappointment. Can't even handle basic boat work. Rivers muttered loud enough for the instructors to hear. How is she supposed to handle real operations? The weapons training was worse. During rifle drills, Rivers made a show of checking his shots, then commenting loudly about accuracy. Must be hard to aim straight, with all that ink distracting you, he said, gesturing at Haley's covered wrist. Bet you got that tattoo, thinking it would make you look tough. Haley said nothing, just continued her methodical routine load. Aim, breathe, squeeze. Her shots hit center mass every time. Tight groupings that spoke of countless hours of practice. But the insults continued. Lieutenant Markson, the training officer, had started to notice the dynamic. During a break between exercises, he approached Haley while she was cleaning her weapon. With the same careful attention she gave everything else. That ink on your wrist, he said, not quite making a question. What's the story there? Haley looked up from her rifle, meeting his eyes steadily. It's how I remember to keep moving forward, sir. That's not what I asked. It's all the answer I have, sir. Ishan Markson studied her for a long moment, then nodded and walked away. But his expression suggested he was filing away more questions and answers. The breaking point came during night operations. Training. A sudden weather alert had created an opportunity for emergency response simulation. Heavy rain and rough seas made it the kind of scenario that separated the prepared from the pretenders. The mission briefing was simple. Infiltrate a mock enemy position, plant a beacon, and extract without being detected. 20 minutes to complete with automated sentries, providing light sweeps that simulated enemy surveillance. It was the kind of high-stakes training that could make or break a career. We need a team leader, announced Instructor Barnes, scanning the assembled group. This isn't a group project. Someone has to make the calls and take responsibility for success or failure. Silence stretched across the briefing room. The simulation had a reputation for breaking even. Experienced operatives' failure meant extra training, remedial courses, and the kind of marks on your record that followed you for years. Kyle looked around the room, suddenly finding his boots very interesting. Rivers developed an urgent need to check his equipment. Dempsey was practically studying the ceiling tiles. That's when Haley stood up. I'll take point, she said, her voice cutting through the awkward silence. Like a blade, the room erupted in barely suppressed laughter. Kyle couldn't contain himself anymore. Are you serious? He practically shouted. You want someone with a strip mall tattoo leading us into a tactical exercise? This isn't arts and crafts time, princess. This is real military training. Rivers joined in, his voice dripping with false concern. I mean, I'm sure you're great at whatever it is you actually do, but maybe leave the real soldier stuff to the actual soldiers. Dempsey nodded along, emboldened by his friends. Yeah, this is like actual Navy SEAL training, not whatever community college course you're used to. But their laughter died instantly when Commander Stone Merrick walked into the briefing room. He was the kind of man who commanded attention without saying a word. His weathered face, bearing the kind of scars that came from real combat, not training exercises. He was scanning the room, probably looking for whoever had volunteered to lead the suicide mission. When his eyes landed on Haley, more specifically on her left wrist, where her sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing those faded black characters. For a moment that felt like an eternity, the grizzled SEAL commander just stared. Then slowly, deliberately, he straightened to full attention and rendered a perfect military salute. Ma'am, he said, his voice carrying across the dead silent room. Every person in that briefing room felt their blood freeze. Kyle's mouth was still hanging open from his last insult, but no sound came out. Rivers looked like he'd been slapped. Dempsey just stared in complete confusion. Haley returned the salute with the same quiet precision she brought to everything else, then settled back into her seat, as if nothing unusual had happened. Commander Merrick held her gaze for another moment, something passing between them that none of the recruits understood. Then he turned to address the room, his voice carrying the authority of decades of experience. Brooks will lead tonight's exercise. You will follow her orders as if they came from me. Questions? Nobody had any questions. Nobody even had words. The storm hit the coast like a freight train, Rain lashed the facility in sheets so thick. Visibility dropped to mere feet. The ocean roared against the shore, sending spray, high enough to coat the observation towers. Perfect conditions for a nightmare scenario. Haley stood at the equipment table, methodically checking gear, while her reluctant team watched in stunned silence. Commander Merrick's salute still hung in the air, like smoke from a gun nobody understood. Waterproof comms check. Emergency flares check. Tactical lights with red filters check. Her voice was calm, methodical, treating the inspection like actual combat preparation. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. Look, I don't know what just happened with the commander, but you don't need to know. Haley cut him off. You just need to follow orders. Can you do that? The question hung like a challenge. Kyle's mouth opened and closed, but no comeback emerged. Rivers and Dempsey looked like they wanted to disappear. The beacon needs to be planted at coordinates 127.4 by 89.6. Haley continued spreading a waterproof map. That's here on the North Pier, approximately 400 meters from insertion. Automated sentries sweep in 30-second intervals, with overlapping coverage. She traced the route with precise movements. Standard approach. Puts us in their kill zone for 40 seconds. Unacceptable. So what's the plan? Rivers asked. His swagger gone. We go under the pier structure. Use support beams for cover. Tidal charts show water level at lowest point. In 18 minutes, that gives us 30-centimeter clearance. Under the lowest beam, Dempsey looked confused. How do you know all that? Because I read briefing materials, instead of making jokes about tattoos. The words hit like a slap. The team moved toward water in complete silence. Rain came down so hard, it felt like being inside a waterfall. The inflatable boat pitched and rolled as they launched. Haley taking lead paddle position, steady, silent. She called out, her voice cutting through the storm. It wasn't suggestion but a command, spoken with authority, from somewhere deeper than training manuals. Kyle missed his paddle stroke, blades slapping awkwardly. I can't see anything, then listen. Instead of talking, Haley snapped. Feel the rhythm of waves, count seconds between swells. Your eyes are useless, but your other senses aren't. She adjusted their heading without looking up, sensing current changes the others couldn't feel. The boat responded smoothly, cutting through water with newfound stability. They reached the pier structure as automated sentries began their sweep. Powerful searchlights cut through rain like laser beams, patterned, precise, and unforgiving. Anyone caught would fail instantly. Down, Haley whispered, and the team flattened against the boat bottom. The light passed so close, Kyle could feel its heat. His breathing came fast and shallow, the kind of panic gasp that got people killed in real operations. Control your breathing. Haley's voice was barely audible, but somehow Kyle heard every word. In for 4 counts, hold for 4. Out for 4, your panic puts us all at risk. The rebuke was gentle but firm, and surprisingly it worked. Kyle found his rhythm, heartbeat slowing to match the wave cadence. Under the pier, water was a maze of barnacle-covered supports and cross beams in darkness. It would be easy to get lost completely, but Haley navigated like she had blueprints memorized. Beam clearance, 28 centimeters. She whispered, guiding them under a low cross beam. Duck heads and keep moving. River scraped his back against barnacles, biting back a curse. How are you doing this? It's pitch black. Sound carries differently under structures. Haley explained barely audibly. Echo patterns tell you about obstacles. Water movement tells you about clearances. Counting tells you about distance. Rivers could hear the subtle differences in how paddle strokes echoed off surfaces. She was reading the environment, like a book in a language only she understood. They reached beacon placement with 2 minutes to spare. Haley pulled out the device and secured it to coordinates with practice efficiency. Extraction route is the same path. Time the next sentry gap, she announced. We move in 40 seconds. The return should have been easier, but Kyle's mistakes had cost precious time. As they cleared the pier structure, automated sentries began their next sweep. Light incoming, Rivers hissed, pointing at the approaching beam. Nobody move, Haley commanded. Don't even breathe hard. The searchlight swept toward them, beam cutting through rain and spray in harsh white glare. They looked like a training manual, illustration of what not to do for people in a bright yellow boat, sitting in open water with nowhere to hide. But something strange happened. Instead of expected alarm bells and failure klaxons, the light passed right over them and continued its sweep. Kyle started to speak, but Haley's hand shot out, pressing against his mouth. She held silence for another full minute before relaxing. "How?" Dempsey whispered. "That light went right over us." "Camouflage isn't about being invisible," Haley replied, pulling toward extraction. "It's about being expected. Rain creates patterns on water. Automated systems filter out weather interference. If you don't move when light hits, you become background noise." They made it back to shore with 30 seconds to spare. As they dragged the boat up the beach, Kyle finally found his voice. "Where did you learn that?" Haley was already breaking down equipment movements. "Efficient and automatic. Same place I learned that some marks aren't decorations. They're reminders of who didn't make it home." The weight of her words settled over the group. For the first time since they'd met her, the three recruits were completely silent. That's when Commander Merrick emerged from the observation post, his weathered face grim in the harsh floodlights. "Debrief in 10 minutes, he announced. "And gentlemen, I think it's time you learned what those characters on Brooks's wrist actually mean." The debrief room felt smaller, with Commander Merrick's presence filling it. Water still dripped from their gear, creating small puddles on the polished floor. As the team stood at attention, the successful mission should have felt like a victory, but the weight of unspoken revelations made the air thick with tension. Merrick stood before a tactical display, his hands clasped behind his back. The storm still raged outside, but inside the only sound was a steady drip of water and the nervous breathing of three recruits who were beginning to understand. They'd made a terrible mistake. The unit designation on Brooks's wrist, Merrick began his voice, carrying the authority of absolute truth, belongs to Valkyrie Reconnaissance, Forward Operating Intelligence Unit, disbanded 2 years ago. After their final mission in the Gulf, Chief O'Hara stepped forward from where he'd been standing in the shadows. His weathered face bore the expression of someone who'd seen too much and remembered all of it. "I treated the wounded from that operation," O'Hara said quietly. 12 operators went in. 4 came out. The mission was classified, but the casualties weren't theoretical. Kyle felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. "Classified? How classified?" "The kind where the families get flag-folded coffins and no explanations," Merrick replied. "The kind where the survivors carry the mission details to their graves, because talking about it would compromise national security." Rivers was staring at Haley's wrist, with new understanding. "That's not a tattoo. That's a memorial." Haley finished quietly. "Every character represents someone who didn't make it home. The coordinates mark where we lost them." The room fell into the kind of silence that only comes when people realize they've been standing in the presence of something sacred and mistaking it for something common. Dempsey's voice came out as barely a whisper. "We didn't know you didn't ask." Haley replied, but there was no anger in her voice. "You saw ink and assumed it was vanity. You saw quiet and assumed it was weakness. You saw different and assumed it was lesser." "Commander," Merrick turned to address the three recruits directly. "The mission you just completed successfully. It was designed based on actual operational parameters. From Valkyrie's final engagement, the techniques Brooks used to navigate in zero visibility, the camouflage methods, the tactical timing. Those aren't training manual theories. They're battlefield-tested survival skills." Kyle stepped forward, his earlier swagger completely gone. "Ma'am, we owe you an apology. A serious apology." "Apologies are just words," Haley replied. "What matters is what you do next." She reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out 3 items: a waterproof notebook, a tactical checklist, and a small digital recorder. "Martinez, you're going to document every stealth paddling technique we use tonight. Write it up as a standard operating procedure that other teams can use." Kyle took the notebook like it was made of gold. "Yes, ma'am." "Rivers, you're going to create a comprehensive equipment checklist for low visibility operations. Everything we used, why we used it, and how it saved our mission." Rivers accepted the checklist with steady hands. "Understood, ma'am." "Dempsey, you're going to record an after-action report detailing the timing sequences and coordination methods other teams need to learn from. What worked tonight?" Dempsey nodded solemnly, accepting the recorder. Commander Merrick watched the exchange with approval. "Effective immediately." Brooks is assigned as tactical advisor for all-night operations training. Her methods aren't suggestions. They're requirements. He paused, looking each recruit in the eye. "The military doesn't just teach you how to fight. It teaches you how to recognize honor when you see it, even when it doesn't look like what you expected. As the meeting disbanded, the three recruits filed out with new understanding, but Haley remained, adjusting her sleeve to cover the characters. On her wrist outside, the storm was beginning to pass. Later that night, as the storm finally exhausted itself, against the California coast, Haley sat alone in the quiet of her quarters. The tactical gear had been cleaned and stored, the mission reports filed, and the base had settled into the peaceful rhythm of successful completion. She pulled out her personal notebook, not the official military issue, but a worn leather journal that had survived more deployments than she cared to count on the first page. Pressed between protective plastic sheets was the original Valkyrie Reconnaissance Unit patch, faded now with threads loose at the edges, but still readable. This tattoo wasn't meant for anyone else to understand, she wrote in her careful handwriting. It wasn't designed to impress people, or start conversations or make me look tough. It was meant to help me remember faces and voices and last words that I carry with me every day. She paused, listening to the sound of rain, finally tapering off outside her window. When I said steady silent during tonight's mission, those weren't just tactical commands. They were the last words our team leader spoke before the explosion that took half our unit. Every time I use those words, I'm keeping his voice alive. The memorial tattoo caught the lamplight as she moved her wrist to small, black characters, seeming to shift and change in the gentle illumination. People see marks on skin and make assumptions. They think they understand someone's story based on what's visible from the outside. But some marks aren't decorations. They are documentation.